Have you ever scammed a scammer? Even the FBI agents were laughing. Back in 1989, I was looking for a house to rent for my family. It wasn't going well. Most homes in the price range I could pay were either in poor condition or in a bad neighborhood. I was chasing every lead, so when I saw a sign nailed to a telephone pole that offered 3-bedroom homes for rent, only $450, I called and left a message. The man who called me back introduced himself as Jesse, and he indicated that he had 2 vacant houses remaining. He gave me the addresses and said to call back if I was interested in either home. The first house was much like the others I had been seeing, marginal condition in a marginal neighborhood. The second house wasn't at all like I expected. It was amazing. Great neighborhood, 4 bedrooms, including a huge master bedroom, and a sunroom with a beautiful view into the backyard. Convinced he had given me the wrong address, I called back, and when he confirmed the address, I quickly told him I wanted to lease it. He met me at the house, and he seemed to know almost nothing about it. He even seemed surprised that the house actually had 4 bedrooms. We signed the lease, and he took my first month's rent and a deposit check for the same amount. After a little more than a month of the high life in our new home, a trivial incident happened that was the first indication of trouble. The float in the toilet broke. No big deal, I spent $10 replacing the part, and wanted to arrange to deduct the cost from the next month's rent. I called and left a message for Jesse that I had something I wanted to talk to him about, but he didn't call me back. I called back a week later to remind him that I needed to talk to him, but again he didn't return the call. Strange. A couple weeks went by, still no response. I was reading the local paper, when something caught my eye. A report of an emerging scam taking place across the country. As the story explained, because the economy had quickly slowed, home values had plummeted, and in many areas, homeowners owed much more on their mortgages than their homes were worth. Some homeowners, though, had a type of mortgage called an FHA non-qualifying assumable loan. This allowed a homeowner to sell their home to anyone, regardless of the buyer's qualifications or ability to pay, with the buyer simply taking over the seller's debt to the FHA. The article indicated that con men were buying large numbers of these houses, immediately renting them out, and collecting rent without making mortgage payments for as long as possible until the homes were foreclosed on. The article went on to interview renters who had been told they had to leave the foreclosed houses, and some key things stood out. They had surprisingly low rent on nice homes, and once they moved in, they could never get in touch with the landlord, despite multiple calls. It started to sound eerily familiar. I asked a neighbor what he knew about the buyer and, sure enough, he told me that the previous owner owed over $100,000 on a house she was told she could sell for about $65,000, but that a buyer agreed to take over her mortgage for the full amount. I was livid. The last thing I wanted to do was give this scammer another dollar. He had already taken my deposit and 2 months' rent. I called the Austin Tenants Council and explained the situation. The friendly lawyer said that I had no proof and that I, under no circumstances, could stop paying rent. I remembered that he hadn't called me back about the $10 toilet float, and that I had never told him why I had called. I decided to give him one last chance, and if he called me back, I would have to keep paying rent. I called him one last time, acting extremely angry and threatening, and waited. He never called back, and I never sent another check. About 3 months later, we got the first note on our door demanding that we call the bank about your mortgage. It had begun. The same thing happened for the next 4 months. During the 4th month, we found a notice posted on the door that the house was being foreclosed on, and that we had to vacate it in 60 days. In the end, we were in the house for just over 9 months, for which we paid 2 months' rent and lost the deposit. The scammer lost over $2,500 just for not returning my call about a $10 toilet part. We found a new home and forgot about the whole situation. 3 years later, I was in my garage when my wife came in and said, "Mark, 2 guys from the FBI are here and they want to talk to you." The agents introduced themselves and asked if we had lived at the address of the scam rental house. I said, yes, for 9 months. They told me that Jesse had been arrested while crossing the border into Mexico. He had pulled the same scam on over 20 houses, and they were tasked with building the felony case against him for cheating the FHA. They said they would need a copy of my lease agreement and copies of all the rent checks. Yeah, about that, I stopped paying after the 2nd month. I explained that I quit paying because of the toilet piece and everything, and they burst out laughing. I gave them the lease agreement and agreed to get copies of the few checks for them. Jesse later pled guilty and was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. Ironically, the house is now worth $270,000 more than what he had originally paid for it. If he had just paid the mortgage, he would have been wealthy and free.